Hello, everyone. Our group is going to present on the International Atomic Energy Agency. I am Shirin, and I will be presenting to you the basic facts. Kristen will talk to you about the structure. Bernard will speak about the successes, and Oliver will finally discuss the failures of the IAEA. So, quick facts. The IAEA was established on July 29th, 1957. It was established independent of the UN through its own international treaty. This gentleman you see here smiling happily, he is President Eisenhower, the child brain behind this agency. He first discussed about establishing such agency in 1953 in an Atoms for Peace talk. The headquarters of the IAEA is in Vienna, and the current director is Mr. Yukiya Amano from Japan. The mission of the IAEA is to encourage the development of the peaceful applications of nuclear technology, to provide international safeguards against misuse of nuclear technology and nuclear materials, and to finally promote nuclear safety. The IAEA membership. So it has 162 member states currently. However, in 1994, North Korea withdrew. It's a bit complex to discuss it here, but it's online if you're interested to see why they withdrew. And Cambodia withdrew in 2003. Now, they withdrew because they had no interest in getting nuclear technology, and they found that they were paying fees to an agency that was not as useful to them. So they withdrew. Something to consider is that states don't need to be signatories of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, in order to be the member of the IAEA. For example, Israel has never signed the NPT treaty, but is a member of the IAEA, and it does pay its fees. The IAEA only reports to the Security Council and the General Assembly. Without these two, it has no power. It has two regional safeguard offices that are in Canada and Japan, and it also has two liaison offices in New York City and Geneva, and also three laboratories located in Vienna, Cyberdent, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, it's in Austria, and Monaco. The Director General's duty is to oversee the IAEA's 6 departments that carry out the mission. Now, these 6 departments are nuclear energy, nuclear safety and security, nuclear science and applications, safeguards, technical cooperation, and management. And what I find fascinating about this is that the IAEA brings together policy makers and politicians and political scientists and international studies and it mixes it with engineers. Now together they work to carry out the mission. One cannot really function without the help of the other, which is really, really neat about this agency.
The structure of the IAEA is divided into 3 major organs of the agency: the General Conference, the Board of Governors, and the Secretariat, all of which are led by the Director General, Mr. Yukiya Amano from Japan. First, the General Conference is the highest policy-making body of the IAEA and comprised of representatives from all member states. They approve the agency's program and decide on matters brought to them by the Board of Governors. The General Conference is also tasked with appointing a new Director General in the event of a vacancy. Secondly, the Board of Governors is comprised of 35 representatives designated and elected by the General Conference for 1-year terms. The statute of the IAEA places quotas on 8 designated geographic locations to ensure that one geographic location does not have more representatives than another. These regions are North America, Latin America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Africa, Middle East and South Asia, Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and the Far East. Led by Marta Ziakova, the board meets 5 times a year to discuss future recommendations made at the General Conference, which is its main responsibility at meetings. A 2/3 majority, with each member getting 1 vote, must approve all decisions for both departments of the organization. This is done by a show of hands, but can also be done via roll call if requested. However, an election for new members of either of these departments is done via secret ballot. Thirdly, the IAEA Secretariat is comprised of 2,500 employees from over 100 countries in multidisciplinary fields to help with the smooth operation of the organization. The regular budget for the IAEA in 2014 was 344 million euros, or a little over 400 million US dollars. The budget is written by the Director General based on projected costs for the next year, which is then screened by the Board of Governors and approved at the General Conference. Each member state makes voluntary contributions towards the organization's budget for the year, with individual nations giving considerably more than others. In 2014, some contributed less than 3,000 euros, while the US contributed over 78 million euros, by far the highest amount.
All right, so now I will cover some successes of the International Atomic Energy Agency. So I'll cover two. The first, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, was largely involved in providing the public with information regarding the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan. So just some background on that. It was an earthquake and tsunami in March 2011. And one of the nuclear reactors in this huge plant in Japan was damaged by the natural disaster. So the IAEA was tasked with gathering information for and providing information to its member states. So the IAEA sent its Director General, Yukiya Amano, to the site of the disaster to survey it and gather information. So this was a success because one of the main goals of any international organization, as we've learned in class, is to provide its member countries with information and to spread information in general. So this instance of the IAEA spreading information about a disaster such as that of Fukushima is a great example of the organization doing exactly what it was intended to do. So the spread of information is imperative for its member countries of an international organization to be able to mobilize whatever resources are necessary to combat whatever issues at hand. So in this case, the countries want to know about the toxicity of the nuclear waste or how dangerous it is to its citizens, and it wants to be able to protect its citizens. For example, as a native of California, I remember iron pills being advertised by the government as a protection against radiation, and it was because of the information gathered and spread by the IAEA that California knew what precautions to take. So the accident in Japan wasn't large enough, obviously, to warrant any large-scale reaction from California or the United States, but the information undoubtedly helped people in Japan. And if it was a bigger issue, that would have helped people in the United States too. So another success that the IAEA had was that of the Chernobyl project. So this was a project information on the Chernobyl disaster. Some background on that. This was a huge nuclear disaster in 1986 that resulted in a large number of deaths. Entire towns had to be abandoned. They're still abandoned today. So the IAEA held multiple conferences on this accident in 1991 and 1996. The conference in 1996 was a decade after the disaster. And on the IAEA website are the proceedings of the conference. Included in the proceedings is information regarding the consequences of the accident. So, like I mentioned earlier, towns had to be just abandoned. Obviously, there were effects that the IAEA couldn't help out with or provide information for. Those were other international organizations that dealt with that, but the IAEA just helped with the nuclear part of that. And, overall, if it weren't for the IAEA, there wouldn't be a forum for sharing information regarding accidents such as those of Fukushima or Chernobyl. So without the spread of information made easy by organizations such as the IAEA, preventing future accidents would be a lot harder. One of the main reasons the IAEA is around is to help prevent things like Fukushima happening again in the future, it's important to have the information readily available for people building nuclear plants like Fukushima. So that's one thing that the IAEA helps out with, and that's one of the main reasons they're very successful.
One example of a failure of the IAEA is its inability to monitor Iran's nuclear program over the last 10 years or so. On the IAEA's website, its mission statement is as follows, as you see on screen. In red are some of the offenses that I deem failures in regards to their monitoring of Iran's nuclear program. Some examples are the IAEA's failure to facilitate the transfer of knowledge regarding Iran's nuclear program and weapons capability, as well as serving as a global focal point for nuclear cooperation. It has failed at doing so since its knowledge on Iran's program has not served as helping facilitate international negotiations, both within member states as well as the United Nations as a whole. The IAEA's inability to understand Iran's nuclear program began in 2002 when information within Iran came out declaring that there were secret nuclear power plants found, and then Iran agreed to inspections by the IAEA. A year later, the IAEA discovers evidence of weapons-related material regarding a nuclear program being built, so Iran agrees to suspend its production. However, over the next couple years, various intelligence reports, such as a main report from American intelligence, presented to the IAEA information that hinted at Iran building back up its nuclear weapons program. In 2006, Iran resumes enrichment at a nuclear power plant, Natanz, after negotiations with European and American officials collapse. The IAEA approves a resolution to the UN Security Council to report Iran's nuclear program again due to, quote, absence of confidence towards the, quote, capability of weapon production in Iran's nuclear facilities. Later in that year, Iran opens another nuclear reactor, which creates fuel for the creation of nuclear weapons. This all comes to an end in 2006 when the Security Council of the UN, not the IAEA, approves sanctions intended to curb Iran's nuclear program. However, in 2010, the IAEA reported that extensive, quote, past or undisclosed evidence about Iran's nuclear weapons activity continued well beyond said suspension date in 2003 and specifically mentioned Iran tested ways to detonate weapons and design warheads. Although some may deem these economic sanctions positive and helpful towards spreading and facilitating the knowledge of Iran's nuclear program, the IAEA report in 2010 proves otherwise. Not only did the IAEA disclose that it had very little knowledge of the grand picture of Iran's nuclear program, it failed to report to other powers, whether organizations or states, able to craft legislation. This means states cannot cooperate with each other since they do not fully understand their partners due to the lack of information the IAEA has provided. This issue is still an issue. In recent years, in the beginning of 2013, Iran is still failing to cooperate with the IAEA. It is not granting permission to inspect some of its power plants. And even if it is, it's only allowing, quote, managed access. And that's only to some sites. It's not even to all of the sites. This has been increasingly difficult for the U.S. and the UN to attempt to shut down or limit Iran's nuclear weapons capability, as well as Iran attempting to build its nuclear energy program. It's put a huge obstacle in any state's legislation process.